Welcome back, everybody, to part 2 of our 2-part episode on diagnosing poor performance. Last week, Karen Shulman and I had a chance to really dig into a critical component of poor performance, and well, quite frankly, performance in general, and that is the role of the manager. She highlighted 3 really critical points, and I hope everybody had a chance to listen to that and realize that when it comes to performance, we have to look at the leading indicators. Because if we're checking out performance, poor performance, or great performance after the fact, then we are looking in the rearview mirror. We got to get back upstream and start to think about what are the variables that help to influence high performance. So today, we're shifting gears and we're going to be talking about our individual contributors, our team members, our employees, and what it really takes to look at those critical leading indicators that help to elevate performance and help us to achieve things that we talk about like job fit, manager fit, and team fit, which ultimately lead to culture fit. So let's dive into part 2 of Diagnosing Poor Performance with Karen. The Boss Hole Chronicles are brought to you by Real Good Ventures, a talent optimization firm helping organizations diagnose their most critical people and execution issues with world-class analytics. Make sure to check out all the resources in the show notes and be sure to follow us and share your feedback. Enjoy today's episode. Let's shift gears, Karen, to thinking about poor performance or diagnosing poor performance now with our employees or our individual contributors. I think you make a really insightful point that all too often when there are performance issues, we immediately gravitate to our teams, our employees, our individual contributors. And I think what you've helped us realize, Karen, is we first need to look at the managers. The managers and the supervisors ought to be the first stop. That ought to be the leading indicator of how performance is showing up. You know, good or bad, it's going to really hinge on the effectiveness of our managers. But now when we think about our teams, our individual contributors, for years, whenever I've done leadership development, leadership coaching, or working with managers, I talk about what happens. I mean, you run into poor performance, you run into somebody or a collection of people that are not performing up to standards. And first of all, we have to understand what are those standards? What does great performance look like? Actually, surprisingly enough, I'm not sure. I think this gets back to your original point that if you don't understand what great performance looks like or exceptional performance, then you need to go back and define that. But I would always give managers 3 questions to ask themselves when it came to a particular poor performer. And it's kind of like a litmus test. It's like, first of all, do they know what's expected? So that's and as the manager, related to the manager, that's the first thing you ask. Does the manager even know what's expected, and have they communicated that? But have you communicated to your individual or to your direct report? Do they know what's expected in this particular role? And it's not anecdotal. It is written down and it's absolutely clear. Second thing is, do they have the skills? So this gets back to what we would call their briefcase. Do they have the skills to do what you're asking them to do that is well defined? The thing about skills or the briefcase is that we can build that. With a good training and development program, we can build their skills. And then the third question is, do they have a support system around them? In other words, is the manager removing barriers? Do we have the right resources around them to be able to perform? And if performance is still below expectations, then we may have what we would call as a misfit, not the individual, but maybe we don't have the right person in that role. So the 3 questions I would always ask, because ultimately I want to get to head, heart, and briefcase. That's where we really can start to look at the elements of performance and whether or not we have all of those being met. But the first question is, do they know what's expected? Then the next one, do they have the skills? And third, do they have the support system? Do those 3 questions make sense to you?
They absolutely make sense. And I do think that it's not, I'll start with your first one. Do they know what's expected of them in the role? I think managers and their direct reports should sit down and really talk through that. Mm-hmm. Because even if you hand somebody a job description and say, okay, this is what you're responsible for doing, and here are the first projects and blah, 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 blah.
Right.
If there is no conversation of what the expectations are, you as the manager may have very different expectations than what the employee has.
Mm-hmm.
There may be, you may be on two completely different planes, or you may agree on some things, but you have some wild, things diverging from there.
Yeah.
That's right.
Oh yeah. We go in different directions. Yeah.
That's right. So the expectations are not just me as the manager. This is what I expect of you in the role. I think it's also gathering some information from the employee to understand and gain clarity on what they feel the expectations are and how they're to go about meeting those.
Yeah, for sure. I think about how many organizations, when we're doing job targets and we're helping them create job targets for open positions or positions that they need to fill, or moving somebody to a new position, and how many, well, we ask them, well, do you have a current simple job description and clarified expectations? How many of them don't have that? And that's kind of inexcusable. I mean, it really is, especially if we're going to compensate people or review their performance. But if you can't pinpoint it, how can they pinpoint it? And you get back to those wild assumptions again. Go ahead. What are you going to say?
Well, and you and I have worked with some people who basically have said, hey, look, they've been in the field for X number of years. They've done this job for different companies.
Right.
They know what they're doing. I don't need to talk to them about it.
Right.
It's like, wait a minute. You have different systems. You have different people. You have different policies. You have different ways of going about doing the business. You have different departments. You have, it's not the same.
No. And that's where those wild assumptions, misunderstandings, and that's where we get going in two totally different directions. And then when performance review time comes, or somebody has to be put on a performance improvement plan, that's when things erupt. And that's the thing, Karen, that I think our listeners can take away from this is it's totally avoidable when you do the work up front. When you answer these questions up front with the manager, and then understanding expectations, skills, and support, you start to take care of so many of those downstream issues related to performance. Ultimately, though, I want to revisit the idea of head, heart, and briefcase. Now, we talked about that with the manager and how critical it is to have alignment around head, heart, and briefcase with the manager. But let's talk about our individual contributors. The briefcase, when you hear, and by the way, go into the show notes because there's a link to our head, heart, and briefcase episode. But the briefcase is what most people consider to be like the resume or a job application. This is what people have put down on a piece of paper, or the chronology of their work history. And I would say, I don't think it's an unreasonable claim to make that for pretty much all of work history, the resume or the briefcase has been the primary data point, if you will, for making a hiring decision. And it's just not a reliable predictor. The resume and the briefcase, there is virtually no correlation to a person's performance or their capacity to perform. It just simply tells us what they've done in the past. But we've put far too much weight in the resume.
Totally agree. I think it's definitely a flaw in the system, and something that would probably serve our businesses much better going forward if we focused on some other things.
Yeah. And so those other things, well, and by the way, just to clarify, the resume is not unimportant. The briefcase helps to establish what are the minimum qualifications a person needs to even be thought about to take this job. And the really cool thing about the briefcase is we can build the briefcase. If somebody comes in, they're a great behavioral or cognitive fit to the job, which we'll get to in the head. That's okay. We'll train you. We actually had we had an episode with Jim Sparadolozzi from Predictive Index, as a matter of fact, and he actually looked at, well, the title of that episode was Experience as a Negative, and he said, listen, we're not looking at the briefcase. As long as you have the good wiring, the good behavioral and cognitive wiring that we need, we will train you. We will give you the briefcase. That's a very, very different way of looking at things. And they've had great success too. And we will be right back.
With employee disengagement at its highest level in 9 years, your company can't afford to miss the mark when it comes to optimizing your hiring, management, and team performance practices. At its lowest level, employee turnover costs you $11,000 per person, and those are dollars you can easily save with the right set of people analytics. Real Good Ventures is a talent optimization consultancy specializing in world-class analytics specific to your people and the critical role they play within your organization. Gain confidence in your hiring practices, keep the boss holes from driving your talent away, design your teams for flawless execution, and create a culture that offers meaning and fulfillment. Real Good Ventures has a family of validated diagnostic tools specific to the human aspect of business, because we know that all business issues are people issues. Visit us today at www.realgoodventures.com and bring meaning and fulfillment back into your workplace.
Okay, let's get back to the program. Beyond the briefcase, we have the heart. And Karen, would you share with our audience members, and they've heard this before, but I always think it's good to get back to, when we think about head, heart, and briefcase, what does the heart represent?
Well, I think the heart represents a person's value system. Mm-hmm. I think it represents what they are looking for, what brings them meaning. What are the things that they like? Mm-hmm. Is there a good mesh between? I'll take it to the point of even talking a little bit about culture. I think for does the organization have a culture that fits what's important for the employee? Does the organization do things that are meaningful, purposeful, that are fulfilling, et cetera, et cetera? So I think it's those things, and I'm sure that you can probably enhance that a little bit, John.
Well, the word I think about with your description, Karen, is passion. I mean, and I don't think there's any, I think we want to know, and as an expert in behavioral-based interviewing, Karen, you know that with the right kinds of questions, we can begin to understand what are a person's interests and their passions and their core beliefs or their core values and their belief system, because I love the word too, does it mesh with what we need? So we have such a variety of different clients. For example, we have an amazing client, and they manage a park system, a huge park system, an award-winning park system in one of our metropolitan areas. And the work that they do, there's a real passion that those employees have. I mean, you can feel it when you're there, and plus it shows up in the work because these parks that they've developed are remarkable. We have another client that services at-risk children, and when you meet the folks that have been there a long time, there is a real passion. There is a commitment that to me is a real heart issue. So if you can get the heart involved, that's another part of the person. The head really talks about the data that we gather with our analytics. So the behavioral drives, the natural behavioral DNA that a person has, by the time they're 8 to 10 years old, we can measure that. And general cognitive ability, which we define as a person's capacity to deal with complexity. Because let's face it, every job in your organization, for all of our listeners, every job has a different level of complexity. So wouldn't it make sense to match the level of complexity with a person's ability to manage it and deal with it? Because if you really, those two things, behavioral alignment and cognitive alignment to a job, are incredibly accurate predictors of performance. So when we have people that are struggling and we're trying to diagnose performance issues, immediately what we go to is head, heart, and briefcase. First of all, do they have the skills, which is what we talked about before? One, do they have a real passion for this kind of work? Because that can be kind of elusive and subjective. But most importantly, how does their behavioral wiring align with the job target and their cognitive ability align with the complexity of the job? Right there, you are going to be able to diagnose where you may have some real issues with performance. So what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think that that's right on target. And it is, as we talked about, it's almost as if we're flipping what we're needing to look at.
Yes.
We're not focusing so much on the briefcase. Mm-hmm. we're actually, there needs to probably be much more focus on the head, the cognitive and the behavioral. And that's where we're really going to find probably the issues.
Yes.
Because briefcase, as you said, briefcase things can be taught. If we can train people on those things.
I know, Karen, you've heard this from clients that we have a performance issue. So somebody is struggling in performance and they say, but Karen, I mean, this person has an MBA. I mean, they went to this school or that institution. They've got these advanced degrees. And I mean, that is a perfect example of you are looking at the wrong thing. That is a briefcase thing. And I'm not discrediting anybody that gets an advanced degree or anybody who chooses to broaden themselves academically, but that is a briefcase thing. That is not an accurate predictor of performance. And I'll tell you what, I've gotten some real pushback on that.
Well, it's interesting because the first thing that comes to my mind based on our earlier discussion is looking at the wrong barriers.
Oh, yeah.
You're assuming that the barrier is, wait a minute. What did they present to us? They come from this great school and they have this great experience. And well, that must have been wrong. Why are you focusing on that? There have to be other issues that are impeding performance, which are probably more related to what the person is behaviorally and how they are cognitively. For sure.
So I want our listeners to really, I hope it really resonates with them, Karen. What you said is we need to turn it upside down. We automatically go to the briefcase to try to diagnose performance issues, and that it should be inverted. We need to look at the head, behavioral and cognitive alignment with what's expected first, because those are the best predictors of performance. Well, so stepping back, I really love the fact that when you think about diagnosing poor performance, there's two parts to this. Number one, go upstream to the leading indicators. Think first about the manager, the supervisor. How well equipped are these people to truly elevate performance? And then the second part is, let's dig into the individual contributors, head, heart, and briefcase, actually in both cases, but for different reasons. So what else would you offer as it relates to diagnosing poor performance before we wrap it up?
The word openness comes to mind.
Oh, okay.
Open-mindedness. And again, I think it goes back to drop the assumptions and be open-minded about what you're looking at, what you're looking for, and how you're going to solve the performance problems. It's not necessarily the other person that has the issues. Could be you, could be other people in the organization, could be structural things.
Right.
But I think it requires more open-mindedness than what I certainly have seen in my work history.
Well, and this common theme that our listeners have heard for the last couple of years is it really does require a reinvented manager, reinventing the role of the manager, drawing on different characteristics, openness, transparency, psychological safety, things that 30, 40 years, 10 years ago, people would have said, oh, that's just all that soft stuff. No, this is the stuff that's going to make or break organizations for sure.
Well, and as managers, we should be really recognizing and remembering that one of the key things that we're there to do is to help grow and develop people.
Yep.
And that requires what we've talked about, the open-mindedness. And I'm responsible for ensuring that this person has everything they need to perform.
Yep. Hold them up instead of holding ourselves up. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, Karen, this has been great. Thank you so much. It's so good to have you back. And listeners, just make sure you go in, check all of the show notes. We're going to put links to some of the other episodes that we had referenced. Stay tuned because, again, we want to do more of these roundtable discussions and certainly hear from our esteemed colleague and very wise friend, Karen Shulman. But it was great having you back, Karen. Thank you so much.
John, so great to be here and always a pleasure to work with you on these podcasts. So much fun.
It is fun. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Boss Hole Chronicles. We'd like to thank our guest today on the Boss Hole Chronicles. And if you have a Boss Hole Chronicles story of your own, please email us at mystory@thebossholechronicles.com. Once again, mystory@thebossholechronicles.com. We'll see you again soon.